Hey, how you doing? It's Clayton here from howtodrawcomics.net, and in today's very special demonstration, what I'm going to be showing you is a broken down step-by-step process, the very method that I use for constructing an alluring, sexy female figure. But we're going to take it a step further beyond that because I'm also going to take you through the costume design process. So, what happens once you've got the figure down onto the page, the figure that you want to go with that's going to work? Well, I'm going to show you how to add anatomy in on top of that, and then the clothing, taking it through to a finished, penciled character that is ink ready. In other words, you can send it off to an inker. They can go over the top of it and turn it into a polished line art illustration. Or you can ink it yourself. And you can guarantee that there will also be a follow up demo that'll show you exactly what that involves for this demonstration as well. But today, we are focused on just the penciling aspect. And what we're going to be talking about primarily in regards to figure drawing for the female is how to strike a pose that is attractive, a pose that appears feminine, that has that feminine energy integrated into it, how to get that smooth flow throughout the gesture of the body. And then talking about the proportions and the anatomy as well and what needs to be considered there. But before we crack into this demonstration, I'd like to give everybody who's tuning in right now to the live narration of the demo a really big welcome. It's absolutely amazing to have you here. So, big hello to Corey Barton, Amaron, Unlucky Jack, and also Chris Maycock. Good to see you here. I'm sure there's no doubt other people will be jumping in to tune themselves into this demonstration and see what it's all about. So we'll give it a minute here. Let me give you a little bit of background as to who will be drawing for this demonstration. So I'm a very big Dragon Ball Z fan, as many of you know. And one of my favorite female characters from Dragon Ball Z is a character named Bulma. And so, what I decided to do is create what you could think of as a fan art of this character, which will be featured throughout this demonstration. So I'll be going through the process of thinking about the kind of pose that I might want to go with for the character, her proportions, and the costuming to ensure that indeed, when we see the end product, she's recognizable as the character Bulma. And so I think that this is going to be a lot of fun and that you're really going to enjoy it. I know that I had a lot of fun putting this together for you. And really, the big difference between this fan art of Bulma and a regular fan art that you might find out there on the internet is well, she's I've given her a little bit more of a alluring take this time around. So I picked a sexy pose for her, and her costuming has been fashioned in a way that makes her more appealing in a sense. So that's going to be a lot of fun to get into as well. Have a sip of my coffee here. Now, throughout the demonstration, as you're watching, be sure to leave your questions in the comments because what I'd like to do is answer them either organically during the narration of the demo or after it's done. The demonstration will go for roughly about 2 hours. So we're covering a lot of ground here. You'll be getting an absolute download of knowledge. And what's of particular note here is that the demonstration will actually be taken down. The live version of it will be taken down afterwards and compiled potentially into a official video that'll be featured in the How to Draw Comics YouTube library, or packaged up into a premium product that'll be available on the site. But regardless of what happens to it here on after, once the live presentation is finished, you will be getting a inside look into the entire process and what it involves. So be sure to continue watching, and if you're enjoying the content and you're getting some value out of it, share it on your social media, share it with your art friends who you feel may also get some value out of this. Hit the like button as always so that we can push it up in the YouTube ranks and get more artists that are searching for this kind of content on board so that they can experience and learn what it is I'll be sharing in this demonstration. And when all is said and done, subscribe if you'd like to see more content like this, because they are live and they're not necessarily going to stay up forever. It's important to make sure that you are notified when I go live with especially these demonstrations. And leave your comments afterwards. Once the stream is done, leave them in the comments box, and if I keep the stream up there, then I'll be able to answer them for you and use your comments as ideas for future streams later on down the track as well. I'm going to have a sip of my coffee here. Getting my voice nice and warmed up. This is going to be a 2-hour demonstration. So there's, as I said, a lot of talking to be done, a lot of detailing of the process to impart onto you. Take notes, follow along. This is basically a real time demonstration. So you can get your pencil and paper out right now and follow along. Okay, well, let's get this thing started. So, this is a recording, a real time recording of me actually going through the process and constructing the character from the get go. So, I'm going to hit the play button and just get straight into it. Again, if you've got comments and questions throughout the demonstration, be sure to post them into the chat, and I'd love to answer them for you. Hmm. I'm assuming that's showing up as black for you because that's what I'm seeing here on the screen. So what I'll do is just try opening this file up in another application. See, this is the first one that I've ever done, so it might require a little bit of well, we'll see. Let's see now. Um, choose another app. What happens if I share the whole screen? Sort of, Hockey, sort of. Um, if I can get this thing set up, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to download a media player. Maybe that media player will help us out. So just bear with me. Don't worry, we got a lot of time here. A lot of time. Okay, what media player do you guys like to use? Y- I don't mind Windows Media Player when it works, but VLC Player is the next best thing. So we'll very quickly install that, and then we will be on a roll. This is what you get with live. You get the realness. Okay. So now we'll go open with VLC Player. And I'll jump back over here to this. All right. Now it looks like we are in luck. There we go. I'll hit the play button here. Oh, that's unfortunate. I don't think that's still not playing for you. Let me know in the chat if you can see any change on the screen. Oh yeah, it's playing now. Okay, great. Let me rewind that. Okay, so the application of choice that I am using, that I use for all of my artwork, whether I'm drawing or inking, especially, not necessarily coloring, even though I'm sure this application is very capable of it. But the application that I'm using here is Clip Studio Paint. It used to be called Manga Studio, but I love this application because out of all the other digital drawing apps that are out there, it feels the most natural. It feels like I'm working traditionally. Now, working digitally used to be a big deal for me because up until the point I'd switched, I had always drawn with a good old fashioned pencil and paper. And it was very strange to pick up a stylus, draw on a tablet, and then look up at a screen. But over time, as with anything else, I got used to it. And slowly but surely, I found myself in a place where it was now more uncomfortable and strange for me to draw with a pencil and paper than it was to just draw digitally. And I used Photoshop for a very long time to do both my drawings and inks and coloring. But once I'd tried out the tools within Clip Studio Paint, I just absolutely fell in love with the program. The inking tools within it were absolutely amazing, just left the most beautifully weighted line on the page. And the pencil brush, which you can see me using here, simply works so well when it came to pressure sensitivity and the thickness that I like to use for my line. I was able to build up a drawing bit by bit simply by going over the top of the sketch that I was doing and refining the areas that I wanted to bring clarity to. The particular pencil brush that I'm using here is one that was created by Mark Brune, which you can actually find on Cube Brush for free and download for yourself. It's an incredible brush, and the name of it is called Mark Brune's legendary line art brush. He uses it for a lot of his penciling, and now I use it for all of mine as well. And it really does allow you to just keep things so loose in the beginning of your drawings. So just very lightly sketch out what it is you want on the page and then go over the top of it and pull it together in the shape and the fashion that you want. And you'll see me go through that process here as bit by bit I construct these female poses, sculpting them out, testing out, and experimenting with different combinations of pose and positioning and scale, camera angle. I never necessarily know exactly what is going to work best in the beginning. Sometimes I might have an idea. Sometimes there'll be something inside my head, and I think, man, this could work really, really well. And then I try it out. I jot it down onto the page as a really quick thumbnail sketch, and lo and behold, it's not as great as I thought it was going to be. And so I try out something else, maybe a new idea that is based on the previous one with some slight changes. Or maybe I realize that it's just not going to work whatsoever, and I try something completely different. It's important to go through this series of steps, this phase of the drawing process very early on, because you want to make sure that the time that you invest into the development of that idea going forth is well spent, that you're going to get a good return on that effort, on the energy that you're putting into it. And so I always view this stage of the drawing process as sort of like the dummy test stage. In fact, I view these mannequin models, which is the structure that you're seeing me lay down onto the page here, as a test dummy. It can be thrown out, it's completely expendable. And just a moment, I think there's someone at my door. I'll be right back. Actually, I think it's just a bird on my roof, funnily enough. Okay, let's keep going with this. And so I never become too attached to anything I lay down onto the page in the beginning, because if I do, I'm going to be afraid to venture beyond it, to try out new things, better alternatives that could lead to a more ideal outcome. I wish that I knew exactly what I wanted from the get go, and that every line I laid down onto the canvas was going to be the final line, but so often it's not. More often than not, it is the wrong line. And I have to see where to go wrong sometimes in order to redirect myself down the correct path. And it's a slow process. Sometimes I feel like it could be much more optimized, but for some reason or another, I've just found myself to be the sort of artist that needs to go through a little bit of a challenge along the way that needs to come head to head with obstacles in order to move forward, in order to make the best calls. I need to fail in order to succeed. And so failures for me are no big deal. Over time, I realized that they were actually a good thing. I found that they needed to happen, that they were just part of the process, and that the more I failed, the closer I would get to what it was I was really trying to capture on the page. Not to mention, and this is something of important note, you need to give yourself the opportunity to warm up. Now, I was constructing these poses at the beginning of the day before I'd drawn anything at all. And in fact, I hadn't drawn anything in a few days. And so I'll admit right now that I was a little bit rusty, a little bit unsure of myself. I didn't have the confidence that I normally had. And even if you draw every single day, the first drawing of the day is always gonna feel like that. You just need to get into your groove. You need to find your zone. And the best way to do that is just to take a load off, to relax a little bit, and embrace the process of just freely drawing anything down onto the canvas. It doesn't have to be perfect, it doesn't have to work. Just have fun with it. Because when you're having fun, creativity is able to take hold. Ideas are able to flow easier. And you'll find that in complete contrast to when you're being too careful, when you're being too precious about what it is you're drawing, that when you're able to keep it looser, the things you come up with are better than you could have ever imagined. It's interesting that sometimes, in order to do our best work, we have to let go a little bit. We have to take our hands off the steering wheel and let the process go in autopilot. And so, the best place to be sometimes is in a place where you're in the passenger seat rather than the driver's seat, where you're letting the drawing unfold in its own way. You're just there to move the pencil. And what ends up happening down the line as you are compelled to direct it in certain directions, well, that's anybody's guess, especially your own. This is called the drawing journey. This is why we enjoy drawing. And somehow, when we first start getting into studying this stuff, we forget that. We forget that it was never about being perfect, but it was about being creative. And you could argue that creativity and perfection are almost the antithesis of one another. Creativity, it breaks the rules of perfection. Truly creative work goes beyond any expectations of idealism. Now, of course, that doesn't mean to say that you can't click into the aspects of a character and integrate them into your own that makes them appear desirable, that makes them the ideal in the eye of the beholder. And yet, still at the same time, you can introduce a flavor of creativity that is uniquely your own, that sets your character apart, yet still upholds the familiarity, still upholds the good cliches that make a character work, that make them relatable, that make them appealing. And so you'll notice here that the poses that I'm laying down onto the page for this female figure, this female character that I'll be drawing out here, they're not unlike the poses that you might have seen for a sexy looking character. You can see that these poses are alluring, that they have that sex appeal incorporated within them. That's the feeling that I'm intentionally trying to go for here. And so I'll be tapping into whether it's on a subconscious level or on a conscious level, or based on reference material that I might be observing at the time. And I wasn't for this, I was just pulling it out of my head. But you'll be tapping into some library, whether mental or otherwise, an assortment of poses that you associate with being sexy, with being attractive in the context of a female character. And that's exactly what I'm doing here. But then sometimes I'll just draw down a very quick gestural line that'll establish the direction that the leg or the arm or the entire torso might flow in. And I'll just try it out to see what happens, to see how it feels. And sometimes it won't work out. Most of the time, it won't work out. But then sometimes lightning will strike, and you'll find that you've just come up with an alternate pose that works extremely well that you might not have come up with if you hadn't been daring enough to just lay that gestural line down, to direct the leg in a different way other than what you had initially maybe intended. And so, what I'm really trying to get at here is, as I said, the importance of exploration and experimentation during this phase. It's so important that you take advantage of that. If you're going to make mistakes, if you're going to go down the wrong road, let it be here before you've spent hours upon hours inking out the line art or laying in the details or the rendering for that matter. Because if you have a fundamental flaw in your figure at this point in time, it is going to be absolutely tragic. The reason as to why it's going to be so detrimental to the illustration is because a foundational flaw often relates to and is connected with the proportions of your character or the pose of your character. You could argue that anatomy and the placement of the muscle groups aren't even as important as the proportions in the pose of your character because they too are directed by those elements. And so focus on that at the beginning. Optimize the process, optimize the thoughts that you're having, the things that you're considering at this stage, so that you can make the best decisions according to them possible. Because while your mind is filled with other stuff, other concerns, such as whether or not the artwork is going to turn out, or how other people are going to judge it, putting yourself down because of a lack of confidence, beating yourself up because maybe your artwork doesn't meet your perceived standards when sitting next to somebody else's that you admire more. No, don't think about any of that stuff. Just think about the pose. Be in the moment. Don't even think about the pose. Feel the pose. Feel it out. Does it feel like it works? What's it evoking for you? And if you can find yourself in that state during the initial stages of the drawing process, you'll surprise yourself with what you're able to come up with what you pull out of your mind and draw down onto paper. Because then it becomes an organic experience. One where it doesn't matter what kind of plan you might have had going into it, you're able to let go and you're able to play a little bit. You're able to just have some fun. And isn't that why we enjoy drawing? Isn't that how we felt as a kid when we first picked up the pencil? It can be so difficult to get back to that place after you've studied this stuff for years and years, trying to figure it out, being obsessed with getting your figure drawings correct, being obsessed with making sure the muscles are positioned, scaled, and placed in the exact area that they need to be throughout the entire body. or getting the proportions on point, and it occupies our mind to the extent where no other component, no other consideration of illustration really has a chance to take hold. And it stresses us out. It burdens us with this necessity to be perfect. It conditions us to make it look a specific way. And unfortunately, that is the antithesis of what makes a drawing memorable, what makes it creative, what makes it unique. Somehow we forget that proportions and our understanding of anatomy, figure drawing as a whole, was only there to serve as a tool. That really creativity should have always have come first, and only when we run into trouble, only when we discover that our characters look kind of out of whack, do we need to pull those tools out of our bag and use them to correct the areas in which the figure has gone wrong. And it's only years later that I've realized that myself. Because for many years, I was teaching people how to draw their characters in proportion. I was trying to teach myself how to do that. And so anything I drew really was associated with some kind of anatomy study, some kind of diagram. But rarely did I actually sit down to draw a comic book cover or a comic book page or just an illustration for the heck of it. I used to when I was younger, but somewhere along the line, for decades, well, not decades, but at least a decade maybe, I was stuck doing studies. And this wasn't just me. This isn't an experience that I only go through. This is something that the people I found I was mentoring were also stuck on. This purgatory of figure drawing and anatomy and proportions and just filling up their sketchbooks with nothing but. When at some point you've got to be able to apply this stuff, you've got to be able to integrate it into an illustration. You've got to be able to use it for the very thing that you set out to learn this stuff to do. Because that's a different ball game. Just because you're great at drawing your characters in proportion or with perfect anatomy doesn't mean that you're going to be able to create great art, that you're going to be able to create something compelling, something that draws people in. We forget that our own creativity is a very important ingredient within our artwork. And arguably, the more stuck we become in the fundamentals, in the learning process, the less creative we become. But you know what? There's light at the end of the tunnel because a point does come, a day arrives where you find your figures are becoming looser, where you're trying things out that you never tried before. And this seems to happen naturally. It's been happening for me more and more, where you're able to detour away from the structured approach that you'd been learning for so long. And now you're going through a phase of construction that is much more ambiguous, much looser. And maybe this still looks structured to you, what I'm drawing down onto the page. And it is because I am still thinking about the fundamentals that I've learned in the past and I'm using them here, but I'm just using them in a much looser way. And I'm trying to put my creativity first, using the construction method that I have come up with that has worked for me time and time again as the building blocks for my idea. And it's so amazing how these building blocks can ultimately serve the idea instead of the idea being confined to the building blocks, which sometimes oftentimes happens to artists that just simply don't have a whole lot of experience, that are getting into this for the first time. It's amazing that at some point you arrive in a place of development where all of a sudden the all those principles that you learned, you're making them work for you in the context of the idea. But it's this strange synchrony that comes about too, because the two work together. It's not just one or the other anymore. There's no separation. They work hand in hand to help you to convey your idea on the page, and then slowly but surely you build it up. Now, as I was saying, these figures, though they may look structured to you, for me are quite rough. They still have a lot of room for refinement, for further development, in other words. And indeed, you'll see me further refine and develop these figures. There may be entire limbs here that I erase. I'll adjust the anatomy so that it fits what I want, getting closer and closer to ultimately what the final outcome will be for the figure. But it is a journey that you go on. It's not something that you figure out right from the get go. You have to just go with it and trust, have faith that it's going to work out. Why is this important? Because we as artists, we have this tendency to judge ourselves so brutally in the beginning just because it doesn't look perfect, just because it's not a masterpiece yet. What we don't understand is that it has every potential in the world to become a masterpiece, but we've got to put the work in to make it happen. And so these days, when I view drawing and think about the process that I go through in order to execute an illustration, I see it more as a sculpting process, as though I literally have a bowl of clay, or in this case, I have got a very roughly drawn clay shape of the figure on the page, and I'm going to carve away bits and pieces of it. I'm going to shape it into what I want it to be. And I find that coming at it from that angle, thinking of the character illustration process within that frame, seems to be a more appropriate fit for the approach. It seems to work better for me to think of it in that way, because it allows me to detach from that immediate perfectionism somewhat. It gives me the room to breathe, the room to develop the drawing, and the optimism to know that, hey, no matter how it looks at the start, no matter what doubts I have about it, many of them will be attended to and probably eradicated throughout the course of this illustration's creation. So you can see now that I've picked one of the female figure drawings to go with here. And that's what's so cool about having an assortment of different options that you can pick from at the start. You can get all the bad ideas out, but also you can discern what's good from the bad. You're able to get your great ideas down onto the page too. And sometimes it's just mixed in there with the bad stuff. Oftentimes, I find that there's just going to be that period of time where you're not going to be great. Nothing you draw down on the page is really going to be your best stuff. And but here's the thing: you've got to get it out. You've got to unclog the system in order to get to the good stuff. And so that's exactly what I did with the poses that you see me sketching up before. And ultimately, I decided to go with this pose. I ran it past a few different people asking for their opinion, because I don't know what looks good sometimes. I don't know if if my take is necessarily the best take. I'm biased when it comes to my own art. What I think would work may not in reality actually look good to other people. So maybe I am a little bit preoccupied with the thoughts and judgments of those that will ultimately see the finished presentation, but still, I value the opinion of others. I like to get their input on this stuff. So I choose the pose that I like best, that I think will work most ideally for the character. And then I go through a developmental phase where I further refine the pose and get it closer to what it is I'm looking for. And here I'm going through the entire thing with a fine tooth comb. I'm looking for all the areas that can be tweaked and perfected, reshaped in even subtle ways in order to make it look better, to iron out the wrinkles. And I think that a lot of the time, shape is one of the primary concerns that I have. You can see this is especially apparent around the thighs of the character, around the shoulders, around every single part of the figure, the torso, anything really but the head at this point in time. Because, well, the head requires special attention unto itself. At some point, I'm going to zoom in here and I'm going to lay in the facial features, shape the face, and draw out the hairstyle, get it looking the way that I think it needs to look. But at the start, I like to, but before I get to the head, I want to focus on the broader areas of the figure and make sure that's correct, make sure that's good to go first. And so I continuously work through the figure, adjusting almost every portion of it so that it looks right. And I will go over each section multiple times using a combination of the eraser and the pencil tool. And I don't mind this portion of the process either. I think that it is very engaging, to be honest with you. It's a phase within the illustration process that feels like a fun challenge because the hard part is really done. The idea generation is, for the most part, completed. Maybe there'll still be things that I add in there later on, but a lot of the thinking is done, especially on a fundamental level. And so now I can just take what's there and work with it. I can make decisions that are based upon what I've already drawn. I'm not just pulling it out of thin air anymore. And the brilliant thing about that is mistakes that I would have made have already been made, and I can see them. They're clear to me. Based upon those mistakes, I can direct my decisions and make the necessary fixes that'll allow me to get closer to the ideal representation of the character, perfecting the anatomy, the shape of that anatomy, and really the muscle groups underneath the skin. They're what creates the shape of the body. So I am always trying to consider that too. You don't have to outline every single muscle group throughout the entire body in order to do this either. As long as you've got a general understanding of how these muscles come together to form the overall masses throughout the body, then you'll be okay to shape it appropriately. This comes through repetition, through practice, of course. You can see that I've laid in a little bit of a background there just to give the scene a sense of place so that the character isn't floating in a white void. As I said before, the Character that I'll be drawing up here is from an anime series called Dragon Ball Z. Her name is Bulma, and you could say that this is more of an alluring representation of her. So I am going for something that is an intentionally sexy, something that is supposed to be attractive in a feminine way. You can see that through the pose itself. I haven't even added in any of the clothing design just yet. I haven't given her a, a s- a seductive facial expression or anything like that. It's purely through the body language, and already you're starting to feel it. And so, body language is extremely potent when it comes to how the audience feels about your characters. That's why I place so much emphasis on pose, construction, and proportions at the start. Don't get caught up in your head about it, but certainly have that where your focus is, because otherwise you miss out on the opportunities there to make your character more convincing, believable, to look more alive, to have your audience relate to them and feel about them the way that you want them to feel. You are in charge of directing that, at least at the start. Once things get underway, though, you want to tune out a little bit, of course, but you don't want to tune out completely. You've got to be present. You've got to be able to make decisions, of course. Things still matter. The decisions you make are still important. You just don't want to be too attached to the outcome. Think of it like a scale. It's not one or the other. It's somewhat of a gray area, somewhere in between. You don't want to be so concerned with the outcome that you're placing these insane expectations on yourself, which is completely destroying any joy you had working on the piece. But you also don't want to be so detached that you become complacent, that you make mistakes that you don't notice or that you can't be bothered attending to. This is not a good way to illustrate either. You want to meet somewhere in the middle, maybe leaning more toward detachment from outcome and being more present, but still paying attention to when you mess up, being conscious of the potential mistakes that you might make enough to correct them if they do end up happening. One of the reasons that a great artist can be separated from an artist that has less experience, that hasn't been in the game as long, is the only thing that creates a distinction between them is that the artist with more experience is able to pick up on mistakes faster and fix them quicker. Whereas when you're only just learning this stuff for the first time, it's impossible to see where you're going wrong. Your reticular activation system, the things that you need to be aware to in order to be a great artist, simply hasn't been developed enough yet through experience. And so it does come with practice, it comes with experimentation, and it comes with knowledge over the course of time. You need to be consistent with your drawing. You need to be filling sketchbooks up with pose after pose, with anatomy study after anatomy study, but still mixing it in with actual illustrations. You want to see whether or not that knowledge you've been collecting, those areas you've been trying to get competent in, are actually working. That you're able to serve the purpose you want to serve with them. Don't forget the dream. Don't forget what it was you wish you could have drawn as a kid. I know when I was younger, I thought about the artists that I admired most. I saw the work that they were capable of creating, and I'd imagine the things that I would draw if I had their very same ability. Don't forget what those things are. We all have those desires to draw something, whether it's a big grisly monster or a muscle bound superhero or a sexy lady, an alluring woman with a feminine energy that draws you in. It's exactly what I'm trying to evoke here through this lovely lady's pose. Now, you can see that I'm really starting to sharpen my lines up. I've turned that initial pose blue on the layer below using a neat little layer color button that we've got available to us in Clip Studio Paint. And then I've created another layer above that, taken down the size of my pencil brush, and now I'm starting to really refine the shape of the body and even integrate different details that I'd like to see present in the final line art illustration. I'm tightening things up here. I like what's happening on that rough preliminary level, and now I'm starting to set some of that in stone. And I want it to be fairly tight because from this point onward, I'll jump straight over into the inks. My lines are tight, but they're not 100% polished at the penciling stage. Now, I save that for the inks, but I do want enough information here that nothing is really left to guess once I get to the inks. Nothing's left up to chance. Now, there will be from time to time situations where I realize I've completely flubbed up on a aspect of the penciled illustration that needs to be drastically adjusted. And that may happen during the inks, which is always a little bit concerning, but it does happen from time to time. However, it's no big deal. Remember that we're working digitally here. And even if you were working traditionally on this stuff, where there is a will, there is a way, and at any stage throughout the process, you can pull out the whiteout, you can pull out the eraser, you can make the fixtures you need to make, and ensure that your artwork winds out to be the epitome of what it possibly can be. See, you need to be able to have the will, the commitment, and the discipline to sit down and fix your mistakes no matter how long it takes. Because laziness is another big reason why some artists' work just isn't up to par. And unfortunately, that is the truth. You ask anybody who doesn't draw, who observes an immaculate piece of art, and what do they always say? They say, man, that's amazing, but I would never have the patience to draw that out. And the funny thing is that sometimes artists don't even have the patience to be able to pull something like that off. But when you do have the patience, when you've got that level of unbreakable dedication, you will sit there for as long as it takes. You'll put the work in and you will submit to the illustration. You'll be enslaved by it and you'll work on it until it's done. You'll do what it takes to get it to be the best it possibly can be as well. And in the end, what you have to ask yourself is, well, how important is my art to me? Is it that important that I have that much patience in order to see it through to the best of my ability, to the best of what I am capable of? And if you truly value what it is you're capable of, what it is you're able to produce, your art, if you have the utmost respect for it, then you'll do exactly that. Even if it takes you weeks to complete a single illustration, you'll sit there and you'll make it happen day after day, hour after hour, maybe night after night, depending on how into it you are. It's important to respect your art because if you don't respect it on that level, you'll know deep down that you're not really in it for the long haul, that you're not truly somebody who cares about your art. You have to love it. You have to cherish it. You have to value what it is you're able to do. If you get to a point after years and years of study and development only to produce things that works of art that you know are below what you're capable of, it's going to mess with you. You need to be able to rig your success, to remain inspired, to wake up with the energy, the will, and the joy within you to draw something great. And if you're always cutting corners, you're being lazy, you don't really feel like doing it, then there's something wrong. That means that either that ship has sailed for you and you need to focus your energy and your attention on something else, or you've associated some level of negativity to your art. Now, whether it is that you're not stepping up and you know that you're being a lazy artist, if that's the negative emotion you've associated to your art, well, that's just something that has to change up. Start respecting yourself in your art again. See it as something that people appreciate, something that others value. And so you should as well. Can we do and you know what I'm talking about here? It sounds crazy. Like, man, if you could draw anything you want to the most ideal ability, to the level that you could possibly imagine drawing it to, wouldn't that be amazing? And yet you would find yourself in reality sometimes with just not enough challenge to sink your teeth into. Sometimes you just wouldn't have that tension there to keep you engaged. When things are too easy, they become boring. And of course, that's something that can be very difficult to deal with as an artist because if you're working on something for a long time and you're bored for the duration of it, how motivated are you going to be to jump into another piece of art afterwards? Of course, you're going to want to get it over and done with. But again, you've got to change things up. You got to change your perspective on that stuff. Otherwise, you simply won't enjoy drawing. Because if you're always performing below what it is you're capable of, it's going to just make you feel like a less of an artist. And it's going to make you a worse artist too, because if you ignore the mistakes that you make for long enough, the imperfections within your art, they'll stay there. They'll become reinforced and they'll get worse. More and more flaws will start to seep in to your art. And you can see this happen with professionals who have been drawing for a very long time, who used to have an incredible standard for what they were able to produce. And yet, for some reason or another, they've dropped the ball. They become an artistic slacker. And their work just doesn't measure up whatsoever to what they were once able to do. And it can be intimidating to try and outperform yourself each and every time, to look at the amazing stuff that you were doing yesterday or even years ago and try to somehow measure up to it. Because when you're young and when you've got an axe to grind, when You got something to prove to the world. It's something that can provide an incredible amount of fuel to your motivation. But once you solve all of the riddles, once you solve all of the challenges, once you pass all the obstacles, all of a sudden, what is there to drive you? I mean, you're at the top of your game now. You're among the best of the best when it comes to creating comic book art or any sort of illustration. You're a pro. What is there that's left to drive you if not the motivation to get better? Because there's no need to really get better if you're at the top of the mountain, is there? Well, you've got to find whatever your new purpose is going to be in order to continue moving forward and producing work to the degree of quality you've always produced it to. And don't worry, everybody goes through this at some stage. Arguably, you should value being a beginner for that reason because you will never be more motivated than when you're not good enough yet. Isn't that crazy? Of course, some beginners get so motivated because they see the amazing art around them and they go, man, I'll never get to that point. And that doubt can be a massive motivation killer, of course. But to the right person, it can provide an incredible amount of drive. It can make them even more determined. It really depends on what kind of artists they are. Do they give up in the face of an insurmountable challenge? Or does it get them excited? Do they just become more motivated because of it, more motivated to succeed? Will they be knocked down? Will they be pushed over? Or will they continue marching forward regardless because of how important this is to them? You've got to get your belief system in check. For me, one of the primary things I always, without a doubt, bought into was the development of skill and how no matter what it was you were practicing, with enough repetition, you could get at it. You could get good at it. You could become competent. You could master it. And all it took was repetition. Learning the right things, of course, repeating the processes that ultimately would have a good outcome, because there are, of course, bad ways of drawing that, once ingrained into your workflow, can be difficult to undo. You certainly want to try to avoid at all costs following a process that is flawed. But still, ultimately, if you're able to get the right process down and you're able to uh, practice it enough times to get good, it's inevitable that you'll arrive at the place that you have always dreamt of being as a comic book artist. You have to have a strong vision inside your mind of where you want to end up, one that keeps you going for many, many years, one that allows you to wake up obsessed with getting better at your craft each and every day. One that pulls you forward even when you don't feel like drawing. It won't let go. It makes you put pencil to paper because that vision is so great inside your mind that life just wouldn't be worth living if you're never able to realize it. If your craft is that important to you, if getting good as at that level of necessity for you as an artist, then you're going to get to where it is you want to be. I can promise you that. But it's got to be, like I said, it's got to be strong. So you can see here that I've been working on the face. I've got the facial features drawn in, the eyes, the nose, the mouth. I'm laying in the neck. A lot of the time, what I find is that, and this is one of the reasons I try to get the body down first, get that refined, get it to be the way that I want it to be, is because after I tend to the head and I draw out the face, I've often got to resize it. I've got to scale it up because, for one reason or another, I have a tendency to draw heads too small. And it's a mismatch of proportions between the facial features and the rest of the body because we measure out the face with particular units as well. For example, the head is about 5 eye widths wide. And then you've got the positioning of the eyes themselves, which sit at about the midway point of the overall height of the head, roughly speaking, maybe a little bit above that, depending on the formula that you're following for head proportions. And then, of course, you find where the nose sits. I typically divide the distance between the eyes and the chin in half in order to get that. And then below the nose, we place in the mouth. We simply divide up the area between the nose and the chin into thirds, and I drop the mouth opening on that first third, just below the nose, as I said. Then we've got the ears. The ears are going to sit on the nose line and come up to align with the brows, giving us the height of the overall ear. And that just about does it for head proportions. It's about getting those facial features positioned correctly. And then the other important aspect of drawing the head is, of course, making sure that it's got the correct shape. And a lot of that shape is going to reside around the jawline and chin. We want to really make sure that that's as perfected as we can get it, especially on a lady character, because what you have to understand is there's not a lot of detail to play with on a female character. When it comes to men, you can drop in the cheekbones, you can add in wrinkles around the brows, and you can chisel out the chin, give them a nice, shapely, chiseled jawline, and that's great. There's a lot of visual representation you can incorporate in there. But when it comes to a female character, you've got a limited amount of lines to use because any line you lay down onto the face beyond the facial features is either going to age them or cause them to look gaunt, more mature, typically, more manly. So you really want to be very, very reserved about the amount of detail that you add into a female face and to a female body for that matter. You want to keep them looking soft. And the best way to maintain that soft appearance throughout the female figure is to leave as much detail as you possibly can out of it. Because think about this, if you see a really ripped bodybuilder on the stage, for example, what you'll notice is that there's very little softness to them. They're very chiseled, very little fat on their body, which is why you can see all their anatomy, all their muscles popping out of the surface of their skin. With someone who's more soft, you don't get that clarity. You don't get that level of definition in the anatomy. And so, if we take that and we apply it to a female character that we want to have appear soft, then what does that tell us? It means that we need to stop defining the anatomy of every single muscle group throughout the entire body in order to get that appearance and maintain it within the character. So that's a little trade secret there that is really going to help you out. And the best part about it is it's going to require less time. However, it will mean more attention paid to the outline of each of the primary areas throughout the female body. To the outline of the face, you want to make sure that you're getting the shape right within the areas that you would otherwise, or outside the areas within of which you would otherwise be defining the anatomy. Because what's interesting is that the shape of the character will, and every part of it, will suggest the anatomy inside without you necessarily having to show it. That's why you want to capture a good shape, because the human eye tends to imagine or fill in the details. We assume it's there without really being consciously aware of it. And so, sure, at the start, when you're first sketching out the drawing, lay in all the muscle groups because they are going to help you to capture the correct shape for your character. But certainly don't ink in the division of the muscle groups. Don't declare every single one of them visually. You don't need to do that. You can leave most of them out. Only use those muscle groups to help you shape the outline of each section of the body. And what you'll find is you'll get a very soft, very appealing looking representation of your female character. So I should probably talk about, as we're developing the drawing here, refining the anatomy more and more. I want to talk about whether or not I'm using reference here, the purpose that reference serves, and to what degree you really need to use it. Am I just imagining this anatomy? Is this just a representation of the female figure that's been stored away inside my brain waiting to come out? Well, certainly not. It's a little bit of both. So, what I'll tend to do is rather than using a reference right off the bat to figure out what kind of pose I'm going to have for the character, and I may still have some references there, but I like to try and keep the foundations a little bit more creative. I like to come up with something new just through the process of jotting down a variety of different poses and through the warm up period, really, because during that warm up phase, you really can have a lot of fun with it, and you never know what you're going to come up with. If you've got a reference there that you're trying to imitate or hold yourself to, well, what's that going to cause? It's going to cause a certain level of rigidness within the foundational construction of your drawing, something that you will want to avoid at all costs because as you begin layering in on top of that, the refinement passes of the illustration, it's going to start to stiffen up by default. And so if your drawing is already quite rigid, then that's only going to make it look much more, you could say, petrified. You know, when they set things, when someone turns, when a sorceress turns someone to statue, that's sort of what ends up happening to your drawing. It just hardens up. There's not as much fluidity to it, not as much movement. And so you want to be integrating that as much as possible during the foundational stage so that hopefully you can maintain it going through into the final drawing. But that's why I like to stay away from references at the start at least. And if I do use them, it's it's really only for inspiration. Just to it's if I'm having a difficult time coming up with any ideas despite the varied poses that I might be jotting down onto the page, then maybe I'll resort to using some of my favorite references that I've been collecting. And I do have a resource folder on my hard drive full of sexy hot babes that I do refer to when it comes to these types of female character drawings. But as I said, they really don't serve a important purpose at the start. Now later on, when it comes to getting the anatomy and the proportions right and incorporating the anatomical details that I might want to see within the finished artwork, then I'll start to look at a bit more reference just to remind myself what needs to go where and ensure that the details themselves are of an accurate nature. Because obviously, my brain isn't big enough to store every single subtle little detail concerning the female figure within it. There's so many muscles throughout the human body that no human brain could store them. So many subtleties, so many nuances to the shape of the figure that can't be stored at a high degree of resolution. Unfortunately, that's just really the way it is. Our brains can only hold so much information, which is why, as you grow older and you learn new things, your brain begins to optimize itself. It somewhat tunes out most of the information that you'd otherwise be taking in because it already knows it. Anything that the brain already knows, it really doesn't consciously think about. That's why at some point after enough practice drawing, you can almost draw on autopilot. You don't really have to uh, put effort into thinking about it. And sometimes, if you do, here's what's scary. If you do start to self monitor after you've already learned how to do something, your brain will trick itself into thinking that you haven't already learned it. And it'll believe that the way you have learned it is the wrong way and hasn't led to the outcome that it was supposed to arrive at. So you'll start to rewire your mind in a way that somewhat undoes the progress that you've made through the studies and through the practice and through the things you've learned with your drawing. So try not to. This is why as soon as we start thinking about things that we already know, oftentimes we mess it up. you know, if I start to think about what it is I'm saying to you right now, and I really pay close attention to it, and I'm being careful about it, I'm going to mess up. I'm going to lose my place. It's going to feel less natural and just more contrived. I may find that I start making errors because I know how to talk. I know how to teach this stuff. I've been doing it for many, many years. And so just going with the flow is the best possible thing that I could do. Same with my drawing. And same with your drawing, at least the aspects of it that you have conquered. So now we're getting to a really fun part of the process where we start to design the character's costuming. And this is where I'm using reference since I'm basing the character I'm drawing on an actual character that exists, Bulma from Dragon Ball Z. A lovely character that has a great design and a number of different costumes that I had the choice of choosing from. Now, I talked to Corey because he was somewhat collaborating with me on this illustration. Ultimately, he'll be the one coloring the inked line art on it. And so I asked him, Corey, what costume design should I pick for Bulma? And I just went with his suggestion. I believe it was from the earlier Dragon Ball Z episodes. And so I had a couple references of it up as I drew in the design for her outfit here. But I just didn't want to copy it directly because this is a sexy representation of Bulma, one that is supposed to invoke a certain amount of allure within the eye of the viewer. I've customized it somewhat. You can see that her shoulder is exposed there, and we've got that placed on top of a pose that is has that sexual appeal integrated within it, and the combination creates well a beautiful end visual. And it's exactly the kind of visual that I wanted to go with for this fan art. So uh, I'm thinking about the ways in which I could customize this outfit to emphasize the sex appeal that I want to see within this illustration. And costuming really serves that purpose quite well. It allows you to be able to emphasize the attributes of the character that you want to have come forth because how a character dresses says a lot about them. Uh, what they dress in. If you've got a female character that's wearing a leather jacket, she's got short hair, and she's wearing fishnets and big boots and big gloves, then what does that tell you? It tells you that that female character is a little bit of a badass, right? So, and then if you've got a character that's dressed like a princess, well, it tells you that what you're looking at is a fragile, delicate looking female character. So, when it comes to character design in general, whether you're drawing a fan art or not, you want to make sure that you're incorporating the characteristics within their costuming that would be associated to their personality. Certain personalities are going to dress in certain ways. Badass chicks, the rebels, are going to dress with a particular style. Delicate, princess like female characters are going to have a wardrobe which is significantly different. And then you've got a bunch of different female character archetypes in between. You've got medieval female characters, for example. You've got sci-fi female characters, an assortment of female characters that reside in countless genres and themes. So you've got a lot to pick from. And so be creative with it. Really think about who your character is and what is going to work best for them and push who they are toward the viewer so that they come across as more convincing, more believable, more real. If your character has inconsistencies within them, for example, they are not dressed in a way that fits who they are, then it'll just be difficult for the audience to get a proper read on them. And so you'll have a harder time cultivating a connection between the viewer and your character. And really, one of the primary things that you should always be concerned with is ensuring that the audience can relate with the characters that you're drawing. Because when they feel that connection to your characters, they stay with them longer. They think about them for an extended period of time. They don't just look past them. It stops the viewer in their tracks and grabs their attention. Just think about it this way. Let's say, for example, that you're a really big Dragon Ball Z fan, like me, for example, and you're walking down the street and you see a complete stranger out the corner of your eye wearing a Dragon Ball Z t shirt or Dragon Ball Z cap or something like that. It could be anything. Maybe you're really into The Simpsons and they're wearing a Simpsons shirt. It's amazing how you can create a connection with a complete stranger based just on that shared interest. And a similar mechanism is able to be activated through your drawings with the audience. If you're able to clue into the things that cause your audience to automatically connect with and relate with your character, a similar sense of familiarity will start to come about in their experience viewing them. That's a powerful thing. That's what allows them to become hooked. That's what pulls them in. Now, of course, you can do this through the design of a character's costume. You can do this through their uh, the things they say, the way they hold themselves, their hairstyle, their makeup, whatever it is. It's all about visual communication. That's what you can put all of these things under the umbrella of. And it's a lot of fun to play around with. It's it gives you something to think about when it comes to your drawing. No longer is it just about the skill of drawing. No longer is it just about getting the proportions right, the anatomy correct, all that good stuff. I mean, that's important. But now we're starting to move into more of the creative aspects of what makes a great character work, what leaves an impression on your audience, really. People don't care how good you are at drawing anatomy. That's the truth. I'm sorry to tell you. They only care about how good you are at drawing anatomy if the anatomy is messed up. Then they notice it. Then they're like, wow, there's something off about this character. They might not even know it's to do with the anatomy, but they'll see that there's something off about it. But if you get the anatomy spot on, it doesn't matter. The only thing that will solve is the audience not critiquing your art because of its anatomy. But let's say that you get the anatomy perfect. you get the proportions spot on. No normal audience member is going to care about that unless you're teaching them how to do anatomy or proportions, or unless maybe they're an artist themselves and they might give you props for getting the anatomy spot on. But to the general public, they don't care how good you are at the fundamentals. What they care about is how your character makes them feel, how your illustration immerses them, whether or not it can make a connection with them. And if it doesn't do that, then no matter how good the anatomy and proportions of your character is, your character will be passed over. No one will notice it. It will be less noticeable than a character that is drawn badly, because at least a character that is drawn badly, people are able to uh, clue on to that and go, man, that character is drawn badly. But if it's drawn perfectly, yet has no substance to it, no way of connecting with the audience, well, it leaves no impression. It leaves no impact. It's not memorable whatsoever. There's nothing that anyone can connect with. And so, how do you be creative? This is something that is oftentimes very difficult to teach, to turn into a formula that can be delivered to an artist and used, replicated. And the only strategy that I know which makes you effective at being creative is to consider the psychological effects that your character will have on the audience, to consider the principles of visual communication. When you think about things such as body language, it opens your mind up to a whole new vast plane of ideas. You simply start to go on a journey throughout your own mind. You say, for example, to yourself, well, here I am, I want to get creative with this. Let's say you're drawing a character who is a sorceress. Well, then you might ask yourself, what kind of body language does a sorceress have? Not just a sorceress, but a sorceress who feels insecure about her powers, who is maybe somewhat of a novice. How does she hold herself? But not just that, maybe a sorceress who feels insecure about her powers, who comes from a modest background, a background where she didn't always know she had these powers. That's going to cause her to hold herself differently when standing next to other sorceresses that may be much more confident, that may have come from an esteemed background where they always knew and were able to master their power from a very young age. So now you've got three different aspects of just the sorceress archetype that is playing into your decision making when it comes to how you might pose that character. And already it gets you thinking far outside the box of the standard static generic pose that you might have come up with without those considerations. Same goes for the clothing design. When you think about a sorceress, a certain image comes to mind. It's a very generic image. It's one that has probably been ingrained into you by pop culture. Okay, great. That's something to start with. But now let's mix it up a little bit. What if the sorceress was a dark sorceress? Or maybe let's tip the cliche on its head. Maybe the sorceress is one that works her magic for a good cause. I find that tipping cliches on their head oftentimes leads to very interesting results. For example, if I throw the cliche of a hardened cop at you, well, what happens if we make them a softened cop? Right? How would that look? I mean, it may not be the most desirable cliche version of that particular trope, but or archetype, but it could lead to a very interesting result, a very creative outcome. So mix it up a little bit. Don't just take an archetype like a sorceress or a hardened cop or a soldier or a princess or a villain or a hero. Don't just take that, but mix it in with something else. Combine it. What about a softened cop that was a sorcerer, that was a wizard, right? What would that lead to? This is how you start to provoke your creativity because what our mind is really good at, like I'll tell you what it's bad at just by default, coming up with good ideas. Our brain can't do it. All that is rocking around inside your mind right now is very watered down, basic interpretations of very generic ideas that you've come across. There is no resolution to them, no detail. They are unshaped. There's not a lot to work with, is what I'm saying. However, if you start to put some sort of content into your mind, you start feeding it with other ideas that exist out there in the world, with references, with art that inspires you, with other characters, with different experiences that you might partake in within your life, stories, novels that you might read, comic books that you might read, movies that you may watch. Well, all of a sudden your brain has a lot to work with, and you'll notice that it just takes off on its own. It starts to associate one idea with another idea, starts to build upon those ideas. And you end up with an original idea. You don't know how you got to it. It's just mysteriously manifested itself on the page. And what led you there is completely unclear to you, but it's just a natural process that your mind goes through. That's why when we're inspired by something, we feel compelled to begin creating something of our own. It's quite incredible that creativity breeds more creativity, that it encourages it. And all of this stuff just adds to the fun of working on an illustration. When you realize it's not just about getting it right, it's not just about the boring fundamentals, and now it's also about the idea that you're going to come up with, the idea that you're going to be able to be creative with, well, it's a whole different ball game. Now here I am working on some more technical aspects of the clothing. So where my mind is at as I'm laying in those folds and those creases into the dress, here's what I'm considering. I'm thinking about the underlying forms, especially around the breasts there. You can see that there's two underlying forms that are quite prominent. As a result, I'm thinking about the looseness of the dress, whether or not it's wrapping around her bust tightly or if it's hanging off of it loosely. Tight clothing is going to create sharp, narrow folds and wrinkles. And it's going to end up flattening out around the apex of those forms, around the top of them. A material which is more loose is going to have larger, deeper folds and creases within it. The material may actually collapse on itself as it hangs off of the forms. And the contours that are created by those folds and those creases are going to stretch on for longer too. So they may even run across the top of the form, around the entire mass. So, thinking about the material of the outfit that your character is wearing is also an important consideration to make because it will allow you to determine the correct path that you need to follow when making these decisions. If you're sitting there and you're wondering, well, I don't know how to draw clothing, I don't know how to draw folds or what folds and creases I should be drawing for this particular clothing item, well, that's when you need to start to ask yourself questions in order to get answers to those problems that you're experiencing. You've got to start from somewhere. You just can't expect to come up with this stuff out of nowhere. If a pro artist couldn't give you those answers, because that's what they're going to ask you. If you were to ask a pro artist how you should go about laying in the wrinkles and folds and whatnot into the clothing of your character, and they couldn't see the character, well, they would start to question you and they'd ask you things like, well, what sort of clothing item is it? Is it a tight clothing item? Is it a loose clothing item? What sort of material is it made of? Is it made of leather? Is it made of cloth? Is it made of wool? And that's how they will assess your drawing and give you the advice that you need. But you can do that yourself too. And the great thing about doing that is you can collect the correct reference material that you'll need in order to accurately represent the characteristics within that clothing item that needs to be there. So, whenever you find yourself stuck, start asking yourself questions like that. Work through it logically. Yes, you want to be creative, but remember what I said previously. It's not just about purely being creative and just doing what it is you want. You want to be creative within reason, within a way that makes sense. You can be utterly out there with your work and 100% creative, but if it's so creative that people don't understand what it is they're looking at, then, well, that doesn't really serve you either. So you've got to balance it out with a little bit of logical questioning from time to time in order to direct that creativity down the right track. You do want to equally put a leash on your logic and your creativity. Think of them like gears. Sometimes you're going to turn one up, full throttle, and then you're going to want to pull it back a little bit in exchange for the other. You're going to want to weigh them out to create a nice balance so that you're not getting too carried away with the creativity, but you're not getting too caught up in the logic. It's somewhat of a dance. There's a rhythm to the way in which you conduct the mind throughout the course of an illustration. And I'm getting deep with you here on this mindset stuff. The reason that I'm getting deep with you on it is because, look, the practical decisions that you make when it comes to your art and the way in which you execute them, I'm talking about anatomy and proportions and that kind of thing. You can read that in a countless amount of books. You can watch a countless amount of videos on it, learn it in, I mean, any course that's out there focused on drawing. But what you'll rarely hear about is the mindset that you need to have in order to become an effective artist because it's hard to articulate. I just think about it a lot. That's all. That's the only reason I'm able to impart this stuff onto you is that I think too much. I think about stuff that most people don't really need to think about at all. But I do. And so over time, I've tried to figure this stuff out for myself. And it's the only reason that I'm able to break it down in the way that I'm breaking it down to you right now. Because I often wonder, how do the people who look at my art feel when they see it? Is it making a connection with them? How are they, through their perspective, perceiving my character? Do they see the character in the same way that I see? Is my intended interpretation of the character really being interpreted as such by other people? And I realized that the primary goal that we're always striving for as artists, the thing that is at the top of the list of all our priorities, the main goal I have discovered is that we're just trying to get our interpretation of our drawing, of our idea, to match up with the interpretation we want other people to have when they see it. And so we have to integrate, incorporate as much information as possible so that there is no doubt when people look at our drawing that they are getting the correct message, that they're seeing what we're seeing, that they're picking up on what it was we wanted them to pick up on. Because as you well know, any one experience can be had in a significant number of ways, in an endless amount of ways. Five people could experience the exact same thing and have five different interpretations of it. Your job as an artist is to shrink the amount of interpretations that anybody can have about your art down to a single interpretation, the interpretation that you intended for others to experience when they were to partake in the experience of observing it. If you're able to do that effectively, then you are really ticking the boxes. You're meeting your goals as an artist. You are successful in that mission. And it's arguably all that matters. It's why we're working so hard to develop our skills in all of the different areas that are required to be an effective artist, an effective visual communicator. Because that's what we're doing. We can't use our words. We can't, I mean, we could draw words onto the page, but the goal isn't to do that. The goal is to show, not tell. We want people to just get it when we draw something. We want them to understand what it is they're seeing. And so everything we're communicating within our art matters. It needs to be considered, it needs to be implemented with purpose. So never just think that you can just draw randomly, random nonsense down onto the page without consideration. And by the way, I'm talking about anatomy and proportions too here. You can't just draw perfect proportions in anatomy or perfect perspective or whatever drawing principle it is that you can think of right now, you name it. None of that really matters because there's no interpretation that can be formed from that on a creative level or within a context of uniqueness. For that is just a study. That is the only way that that can be interpreted. If you've got a series of figure drawings on the page, then they can only be interpreted as a series of figure drawings, but nothing special beyond that. No, if you want people to see your character the way that you see your character, then you need to make sure that everything you've implemented into them has been thought out to the very last line. And the more that you put that intention behind your work, behind the things that you're drawing, the better you're going to get at it. Because your mind will start to open up more and more to this stuff. And remember, the big takeaway from what I'm saying here is to simply ask yourself questions about your character. Whenever you get stuck, whenever you're wondering what else to add in, ask yourself, well, would my character wear this? How would my character hold themselves? What kind of attitude would they have? What kind of personality are they going to convey? How do they think about themselves? How do they think about others? The great contrast that I can give you here as an example is that which is between Clark Kent and Superman. Now, it's interesting because they are the same person. Clark Kent is Superman, but both are presented very differently and evoke almost opposite feelings within the viewer. When you see Superman, his chest is out, his posture is beyond straight, it's heroic. He holds himself like a man of steel, which is what he is, immovable, grounded, not a pushover. Talking about classic Superman here, classic Clark Kent Superman, the Superman you grew up with. Contrast that to Clark Kent. What do you see? Well, you see an average man, but not just an average man, but a kind of wimpy man too. His posture is a little bit more curved. He stutters a bit more around the ladies, around Lois. And he just looks like an almost stark opposite representation of that very same person. And so this speaks to the power of body language, especially, but also in the way that somebody dresses. You know, the Superman costume looks a heck of a lot more confident than Clark Kent's glasses and suit. And the suit looks sharp, but he wears his suit in a little bit of a different way to the way James Bond wears his suit, and probably a different cut too. Your characters should never look the same as one another, and you should be utilizing expression to the greatest degree possible. The facial expressions within your character, the way in which their body is positioned and in which it moves. Take full advantage of that. Don't miss the opportunity to use it in order to make your characters more vivid, more real, more relatable, more compelling. I've added in a background and, well, I haven't just added in the background, I've gone ahead and I've articulated it further. I've refined it. And as for the background, I did use a reference for that too. That was from a shot of actual Dragon Ball Z featuring Bulma. Completely different pose, completely different presentation of the character itself in that reference, but the background served me well here. And I really didn't have any ideas for the background. I didn't feel quite compelled to get too creative with it. The character was definitely the main focus of this illustration. And so I just went with something that was already there, already existed for this world, and essentially mimicked it. But you'll notice that this isn't really the Dragon Ball Z style that you may be familiar with if you have experienced the anime or the manga before. I've represented Bulma and the background in my own style here. And isn't that interesting? That you can take the characteristics of an existing character or place for that matter in this case, and you can show it in a different visual language almost. Well, a slightly different. You're still saying the same stuff, of course. I mean, you're still speaking in the visual context. Well, not speaking, but viewing in a visual context, rather. But look, I'm getting my own metaphors mixed up here. But still, at the same time, I think it's really cool to be able to mess around with that stuff, to take a character that exists within a particular style and then give it your own spin. Interpret it in your own way. Which is certainly what I'm doing here. I mean, I don't think Bulma has ever been presented in the official Dragon Ball Z in this particular manner, but I'm having fun with it, and it's great to inspire yourself in that way to once again take something that does exist out there in the world and do something creative with it. I'm creating here another customization to her outfit, a little bit more of a exposed variation, you might say. Now, this isn't entirely my fault because I showed Corey the costuming that I'd come up with for Bulma. I showed my brother Corey, and he wasn't pleased. He had expected more. He wanted something sexier. He wanted something more alluring. So I said, "Well, Corey, why don't you look? Here's the figure." Okay, so I gave him just the anatomy figure, and I said, "Corey, you have a crack at coming up with a cool costume design here. You show me what you mean, what you're after." And he did. And so I'm basing this particular costume variant on the very rough concept that he did up uh, for me, what he was desiring, that I had been somehow missing the boat on, sadly. But it was no problem to create another costume variation. And honestly, we wanted a few different options to pick from here just for fun. And to be honest with you, I feel like Corey's costuming was definitely packing some more sex appeal than the initial one that I had. He had arguably done something more creative with it. Sometimes it is difficult for me to think outside the box, but that's why I find sometimes you create your best art by collaborating with others. It's unfortunate that the action of drawing is such a solitary experience that oftentimes we find ourselves sitting alone in our studio at the desk just drawing away with no real input from other people, unless maybe we're streaming live in front of others, or we're in a an actual studio full of other talented artists, which I've always thought would be an absolutely amazing opportunity. One of my dreams is to someday be able to have the finances to afford a studio of my own where me and Corey, my brother, can draw side by side each and every day, where we can bounce ideas off of one another there in person, where we can show our work to each other. And um, yeah, I feel like I could create much better things as a result. I'm not that imaginative, unfortunately. I need things to go into my brain, things to work with in order to have output that is interesting to observe, to look at. And so, yeah, I don't just want to work with anybody either. Corey is someone that I work very well with. And in regards to that, I think you've got to find your people. You've got to find other artists that you resonate with, who align with you in terms of idea generation, who are you're able to trust, who get what it is you're trying to convey within your art. It's not always easy to find because artists are like any breed of people. I mean, they come in all different shapes and sizes, thoughts and ideas, and politics and perceptions, and there's a countless variety of different personalities out there, different flavors of artists, and so you're not always going to get along with all of them. But when you do find those that you align with, if you can figure out a way to collaborate, I believe great things can happen. That you can create some of the most memorable art, the most magnificent masterpieces that you'll ever create, things that you couldn't have come up with on your own. And Corey has always, to be honest with you, served that role in at least my experience of being an artist. I haven't met many other artists like him before who I can work that closely with. And so, in a sense, this Bulma piece, this fan art that I'm creating here, it's really a collaboration with my trusted bro Corey, and he really did help me out with the design process, with the colors, and just as a sounding board, someone that I could show the artwork to and get some feedback from. So you can see here that her dress is blowing up, underwear exposed. It's fun. It's it's a lewd. Well, what can I say? It's something that every young artist dreams of drawing. Well, maybe I should say male artist, or maybe I should just say me. I shouldn't assume anything about any other artist. I'll speak for myself here. I'll speak for Corey too, because no doubt he probably, uh, really, at the end of the day, he probably just wants to draw this kind of thing, which is why we thought we would give it a crack. But the thing about scantily clad female characters is that they provide a wonderful opportunity to talk about female anatomy, to shine a spotlight on what makes it work and what doesn't make it work, what a solid structure is for a female figure, and how to get it to come together in the end. It's interesting too how you dress the female figure up and what sort of decisions you make in regards to their wardrobe, how that can affect the feel coming off of the character. I mean, you can see here that the alternative costume design I've given her is, it's not that it's more sexy than the previous version, but it's essentially enhanced what I had before. It's a different representation of the same thing, but that evokes a very different experience for the viewer. Maybe not a very different experience, but I certainly like it better. I feel that it has got something that it's a little bit different going on with it. And man, I'm having a difficult time with this dress because the way in which Corey wanted it to flow, it was blowing upward in the wind, and I wasn't quite sure as I was drawing it out whether or not it was physically possible based on the cut of the dress for it to fly up in that direction. And so here I am trying to make it work, trying to combine Corey's wonderful creativity with physics. And again, this is something that you want to try to think about, because these considerations we make in order to convey something which is moderately realistic will lead to more creative decisions. You've got to problem solve, right? You've got to try and figure it out. And these different pieces of the puzzle that you need to place all go into the creative process and the series of steps that you're going to take in order to arrive at that perfect balance between something that looks cool and something that looks like it's feasibly possible. and and sometimes it's not, but you can still get away with it because it does look that cool. Funnily enough, I'm still keeping the drawing quite loose here. I've got line work that is being dropped down fairly fast, that is is laid down onto the page with swift, strong strokes. Once again, even though I'm tightening the drawing up here, I want to maintain that energy that was in the initial sketch. I want to ensure that it's present in the final piece. And by really pushing the speed at which I lay these lines down, this is the secret way in which I preserve that trajectory of action, that momentum within the drawing and the contours that are representing it. You want it to look like it's moving. You want it to feel alive. And so r- I wouldn't say rapid drawing, because that implies a certain level of irresponsible line laying. But you want to be careful with how you lay your lines down, of course. You want to be purposeful, you want to be intentional, but still, you don't want to be leaving meek lines on the page. You want them to have strength to them. And so you'll notice that a lot of the lines that I'm laying down here have some level of sharpness to them. You don't want to mess with them. They're not weak, they're not meek. And so make sure that that is the same for your lines, because a lot of the time, what I'll notice within the work of artists who maybe aren't as experienced, who could just be learning how to draw for the first time, you'll notice this always that their lines are very soft, very curved, yet very hard at the same time, very thick. So instead, what you want to do is you want to create lines that are light, but that are laid down with a flavor of jaggedness, I would say. You want sharp corners. Sure, have sides to the forms that are somewhat curved, but leave those corners sharp. Have them change trajectory rapidly, because that's what's going to give more shape to your art. That's what's going to allow it to preserve that energy and that vitality within it as you take it further and further into the refinement stages. Because the last thing you want is for your work to appear flat on the page or stiff, as if the character doesn't have any movement to them. This is something that you want to avoid at all costs. You want your character to have a fluid energy throughout. And I know that it seems like the words that I'm using here, fluid, completely goes against sharpness, rigidness, energy, because fluid uh, lines, they have a certain amount of relaxedness associated with them when you think about it, and in a sense they are relaxed, but they're also combined with this undeniable energy, and you want to capture that. You want to capture that within your drawings, make it a focus. And the best way that I know how to capture it is to draw with haste, but you don't want to be drawing with haste in a way that is uh, unwise. You don't want to be just rushing your drawing. Every line, as I said, it needs to be laid down with intention, with purpose. And yeah, you might be turning up the speed a little bit. You might be pushing the lead faster and further than you otherwise would on the page, or the digital lead if you're using a stylus and tablet. But still, keep it light, keep the line thin too. Thick lines are a trademark that I've noticed comes up again and again for beginner artists that they need to get rid of, because if you're not using a thin line, you need to be using a well weighted line. Thin lines are great because they allow you to be more precise with your contours. They enable you to be able to hone in on and capture the more intricate areas of your drawing with a higher level of elegance. If you're using big, thick lines that you're just laying down onto the page, well, there's not a lot of room to move there. The other important thing about using thin lines that are sharp, that are intentional, is that you can erase them a little bit easier, especially talking traditionally. If you're using thick, heavy lines on the page, that's just going to make a mess when you try to erase them. So keep it sharp, keep it thin, and you can also still keep it light too. Yes, I'm darkening up the contours as I refine them, as I solidify them in preparation for inking. But they're still fairly light. I'm not adding any super thick line weights there, because that's just a stage that is set aside for the inking phase of the drawing. There's no point in going to the trouble of waiting my lines when I'm just going to be doing that during the inks anyway. And I really want to allow myself some level of um, improvisation, spontaneity when it comes to the inks, because I still want there to be a creative characteristic incorporated within them as they're executed. If I'm just retracing the exact lines over the top of the pencils that I've already laid down, then I don't know. I just feel like the inks lack a little bit of life, a little bit of character as a result. That's what I've found in my experience. And so I do like to leave the pencil line art drawing as having a certain level of looseness to it, and giving the inks an opportunity to shine through the line weights, through the different variations of thickness that I might add into them as they run along the contours established by the pencils. And I'm always just trying to emphasize the shapes that I'm laying down here, even more so when it comes to the inks, too. Like I said, that energy, if you don't maintain it wisely throughout the course of your illustration, you'll lose it. Your drawing will either wind out looking weaker or flatter or just more staged. It won't look alive, it'll be lifeless. Here I'm just copying and pasting and doubling up the layers here to make the line work more obvious, make it darker so that when I send this off to Corey to take a look, he'll be able to see it better. But I just love the way that this fan art of Bulma came out. When you look at the shape of the anatomy around those legs, it's absolutely gorgeous. See, shape can just add so much, and it's heavily associated with style. So there's a good chance, depending on the style that you've developed for yourself, that your leg shape may not share the same as mine, that it may be different, that you may have a look that you desire, which detours away from the one that I've established here for my interpretation of how the female leg should look. And not all female legs should look this way. I'll have different characters, some that have skinny legs, fat legs, fit legs, you name it. All of these different leg types will ultimately be interpreted differently in terms of shape as a result, in order to capture them in the most effective way. But you'll have your own interpretations, and that's totally okay. But if you haven't got an established style yet, by all means, imitate the shapes that I'm using here throughout this gorgeous female character's anatomy, because it'll give you a starting point to build from. Remember, as I said before, there's very little you can do without putting anything into the old noggin. You've got to fill it with something that inspires you, with things that you can work with creative avenues that you can take further. So, well, that wraps up the demonstration for today. A solid 2 hours of tutelage there, of deep, in depth explanation into the process of drawing up an alluring female figure that captures the audience, that gets their imagination running wild. Think about the type of female character that you'd like to illustrate the next time you set out to draw one. Are they a sexy, alluring character like the one I was just working on? Or are they someone who is more modest, maybe like a princess, as I mentioned before? Maybe they're a strong barbarian type female character. There's so many different sorts of people out there that we can illustrate and enhance the personality and the feel of. So many creative ways we can do it as well, that this is what makes drawing fun. This is what makes it enjoyable for us. So embrace it. Certainly always keep in mind the fundamentals that help you to construct a solid, unbreakable base for your characters. But then don't forget about the creative aspects as well. Because while you're wrapped up in the fundamentals, as much as they will serve as tools for you, that's not what it's all about. Okay, they're not everything when it comes to drawing a great illustration. What I'm going to go through now is some of the questions that we've received in the chat. I'm going to answer them to the best of my ability, and I'm sure you've got a fair few of them at this point. So let's see what you've been saying here. Again, we've been going for a fair while, so I really enjoy your company, and I thank everybody for tuning in. It's been an absolute blast, and I hope to do more of these. I think they'd be really fun. So I'll start from the bottom. Okay, AFK Gamer 03. Hey, I'm subbing. Hopefully this can help me. I hope so too. We have American Discord Shelby Robertson in the house. He says, just got here. Haha, guess need to scroll back. Yep, that's right. I did a whole drawing demo. I hope, again, that you guys got some value out of it. AFK Gamer says, is there such a thing as too many lines? Because I add a bit too many lines to the face, and when I color it, it looks too busy. Well, yes, this can be something that you really have to look out for, especially when it comes to female characters. It's totally fine to add lines in for the eyes, lines in for the nose and the mouth, lines around the facial features. However, be extremely careful. Leave them out if you don't need to add them in, is what I'm saying, because every single line that you add in throughout the face of a female character is going to age them. It's going to make them look more mature. It may even make them look malnourished or gaunt. So steer away from defining the cheekbones too much. You can, but keep it as subtle as you possibly can. If you define them too much, she's just going to look like Skeletor. It won't fit. She'll start looking manly. It's totally fine to do this on a man. I'm not trying to be discriminative here against either of the sexes, but at the end of the day, because men have a little bit more growth hormone within them on a biological level, their features are going to be more developed. This is why men typically grow bigger noses, bigger ears, and just bigger in general. So they're going to have more chiseled jaws. They're going to have deeper cheekbones. They might even have some details here around the eye sockets. They'll have wrinkles in their skin. It's all that testosterone pumping throughout their body, right? So you know, especially masculine characters, you want to integrate those characteristics so that they are present there. Because here's what's interesting: if you leave out the cheekbones, if you leave out the details of a male face, what tends to happen is a more feminine face or more feminine appearance starts to come through on your male character. Now, this isn't always a bad thing. Feminine looking men can be extremely handsome and extremely attractive to both men and women. They can be a very desirable that appearance for a male character, having that feminine uh, those feminine characteristics integrated within them just through the lack of detail on their face. So it can also cause a character to look younger. The less detail on a character's face, the younger that they are going to appear, the less mature they will appear. This is why oftentimes young child characters that are in their teens or even young children that you draw will often have very similar characteristics to female characters. Okay, so the way you draw a teenager won't be unlike the way that you draw a female character in terms of the detail and the amount of it that you incorporate into their face, especially, but also into their body. As I was saying before, you want to leave out a lot of the definition of the anatomy throughout the female body in order to capture that soft looking appearance for it. This is drawing female characters 101, by the way. One of the biggest mistakes people make when it comes to drawing women is they just add too much detail, and it does not take a lot for too much detail to be added, unfortunately. I fall into that trap even now. I'll add in just that just that one little detail. I'll think, hey, this'll work well here, but too much. It'll be way too much. I rarely define the cheekbones in a female character, and certainly the wrinkles under the eyes or around the nose. You want to leave those completely out, unless you're drawing an old female character. Then it's a bit of a different story. Okay, we've got Shelby Robertson saying, educate the masses, Clayton. Nice, subtle pose. Thank you, my friend. Yeah, I didn't get too crazy on it. I had a few different variations of pose that I came up with for the character, and I asked Corey to pick the one that he thought would work best. Hockey says, digital does allow you to do some tricks to help with line weight. Set your pen size to something small and don't change it. Zoom out a bit and try not to zoom in. Yeah, that's a really good point, Hockey. One of the best things that you can do is work from a distance when it comes to your art, because it gives you that overall look at how it's coming together and helps you to keep the composition in mind as you're working. Composition just doesn't mean the way in which you're setting up the camera either, by the way. It doesn't just mean the props that you're placing around the character. It means the character themselves and their silhouette. So what kind of shape they're making as you pose them into a particular position. It's extremely important to make sure that you're not just looking directly at the one section that you're penciling out, but you want to also, within your peripherals, try to take in the character as a whole as you're working, because that will help to inform the decisions that you're making in that one area, especially in regards to shape. Shape, silhouette, the positioning of the character. These are all compositional aspects of the figure that you need to be conscious of, especially in those early phases of the drawing, because it's great. Once you've got those sorted out, you don't have to even think about them. You can just have fun with the detailing, with the design of the character. Everything hangs on top of that foundation. And so, yes, while it's good to keep it loose and not be too concerned, not too confined to the drawing principles, you want to make them work for you rather than confine you. You still do want to make sure that you've got a good base to work up from. It determines the success of your drawing, essentially, right from the get go. AFK Gamer says, I've got to practice more. I'm going to start taking a sketchbook everywhere I go, especially school. That's a great idea. I did that a lot. I'd commute to university on the train. I'd have my sketchbook with me and I'd be sketching. I remember I went over to Tasmania from the mainland of Australia to see my family, and I took the boat. And on the boat, I was there with my sketchbook drawing away. I took it everywhere, and I would fill it with lots and lots of figure drawings with different ideas that I had for the various illustrations. I uh, I would have liked to have explored further, that kind of stuff. It's good to keep the drawing hand warm, especially when you're first starting out trying to learn this stuff before it's properly ingrained into your brain. Once it's ingrained, then you can have bouts of break for a few weeks if you want without drawing, and it won't really hurt your ability too much. For some, it does. Some people, it throws them off completely. For me, I've always found it's fairly easy to get back into. Once you get those first few bad pictures out, those first few bad poses, you find your drawing groove pretty fast. Things that the brain receptors inside your minds associated with drawing, they start to fire back up pretty quick. AFK Gamer says, I'm digital, but I can do traditional too. I work the same both ways. The only advantage to digital is coloring. Yeah, for sure. And digital can also be a little bit of a more optimized workflow, I've found. There's a lot of different tools at hand sometimes when it comes to working digitally. You've got your eraser, which is a separate object. You've got your pencil, you've got your sharpener, three separate objects, and then you've got your paper, and maybe you're taping that down to the desk too. It's messier typically, and it just requires more maintenance in general when it comes to working traditionally. There's more components at play, whereas when you're working digitally, you've got your stylus, you've got your tablet, you've got your computer and the software, and all the other tools you could possibly need, your pen, your colors, your eraser, whatever. It's all there in the one place, usually a shortcut key away, so it's very quick, very optimized. You still need the same skills to do either or, though. So don't think that just because you're drawing digitally, it's going to be any easier for you beyond the fact that you just don't have as many things to mess around with when it comes to physically what you would be dealing with as a traditional artist. AFK Gamer says, it also bothers me when I make the nose or the face proportions because since the lines are too thick, it looks off. Right. Yep. That's why it's important to keep your lines nice and fine. Fine lines will help you with accuracy. I also have to zoom in on the face sometimes to really focus on getting those facial features correct. Because just like with the body in its entirety and the face itself, you need to make sure that you're capturing a solid shape for the facial features, a good shape for the lips, a good shape for the eye opening, and even the eyebrows and the eyelashes around the eye opening. You want to be capturing a good, solid shape for that looks appealing. Again, style comes into play in a big way there. AFK Gamer says it's true when I make thick lines, it looks off when I fill it in because I have a lot of black. Meanwhile, if I did smaller thin lines, it would not clash with the color. Yeah. So keep your lines nice and thin. Keep them fine, keep them sleek. Hockey says easy to say, hard to do when you see amazing artists, but compare with yourself is the only true progress. Yeah, for sure. If you're going to compare your artwork with other people, the best recommendation I could give you in terms of what kind of mindset you need to have during that process is to see those who are better than you as inspiration, as potential levels that you can and will get to with enough work. They should fill you with energy and passion because now you've seen how far it can be taken by another artist. There's a new height now that you can aspire to get to yourself. There's no limitation to what you can achieve. If you see somebody who is drawing on an elite level, that is far and beyond where you're at this point in time, just know that there is obviously going to be a timeline that you have to travel in order to get to that point. But if one artist can do it, you can do it too. Since drawing is a technical skill that's been proven time and time again, because you can have people who start out very, very badly as an artist who work diligently on trying to improve themselves and get to where they want to be. There is a noticeable improvement through practical application and repetition. And so any level is possible for you. You just got to believe it for one so that you take it as far as you'll need to take it in order to get there. But then with that determination, as long as you keep on moving forth and you don't have anything, I mean, if you have no hands, for example, or you've got there's something wrong with your brain where you can't function properly, besides that, you should be able to, at any level, get to where it is you want to be as an artist. Some people are faster learners, some people are slower learners. If you're a slower learner, then put in twice the amount of time and watch twice the amount of courses, read up on twice the amount of books so that you can get better faster. That's all I can tell you. Yes, it's harder to learn for some than it is for others, but you know, uh, I'm a I'm a hard learner, you could say. I still make mistakes all the time. I don't remember how to avoid them, unfortunately. I wish I did, but sadly, I make the same mistakes over and over again, only to be reminded of how to get past them. And luckily, I've developed solutions for many of the mistakes that I'll inevitably make. You do have to have solutions for them. That's the learning process, really, I would say, is having resolutions for the mistakes that you are going to make without fail. Mistakes is always going to be a part of the process, no matter how good you get. Because if they're absent from your process, either you're not noticing them and you're a bad artist, or you're just an inexperienced artist, uh, or you're ignoring them, or you're too lazy to fix them. And if you really never make mistakes, then it's going to be difficult for you to sink your teeth into something, for you to remain engaged with the process. It's like a video game you're going through God mode on. Then you need to find that next level, that next challenge that's going to keep on pulling you forward. Hockey says, I understand the struggle. I face it every day. When I see other people's art, I wonder why I continue. But you need to look at yourself and where you have come from. And that's absolutely true. That's the other part of it as well, is measure yourself against not others, but you and your own progress. Exactly what you said there, Hockey. At the same time, I think this is why it's important not to place too much importance on your failures or your successes, but try and come at each with an even keeled reaction and mindset. Cool. You draw something good. Eh, you drew something that didn't quite measure up to your expectations. Don't let either of those overwhelm you. If you let your successes affect you too much, then the intimidation and the stage fright you'll begin to experience when it comes to performing the next time around will be enhanced. And if you're placing too much emphasis on your failures, then you'll just feel like giving up and not continuing onward. So it's great to congratulate yourself and to feel good about drawing something awesome that you felt turned out in the exact way you wanted it to turn out, that got a good reaction from other people. But move on from that fairly quickly and jump into the next thing. If you dwell, don't dwell on either. Okay, don't dwell. Just keep moving. AFK Gamer says, all right, the thing is on Procreate, I don't know what brushes work best for the lines. So once I make my sketch, it looks off once I fill it in. So I would say rather than worrying about particular brushes, specific brushes, focus more on the characteristics of the line that you want to establish on the page. We talked about some of those characteristics throughout this demonstration. Two of the main characteristics are sharp, strong, energetic, sharp corners, thin, right? Those kinds of characteristics, these are the characteristics that I look for in my work. How do I achieve them? Try to draw quickly, try to draw with haste but with purpose at the same time, diligently, not irresponsibly. And by doing so, I'm able to get a closer representation of the line that I'm looking for. But yes, if you're finding that the lines on your page are coming out just too thick for your taste, if you're not able to capture the kind of details that you would otherwise be able to capture with a thinner line, then that should inform you, right? We can teach ourselves a lot of this stuff. we can learn through knowing what we don't want just as much as knowing what we do want. Because the former informs you on the latter. If you don't want a particular thing, then you must want the opposite of it. So strive for that. AFK Gamer says, yeah, I overthink my lines and they end up wobbly and too stiff. Yeah. So speed, man. And by speed, I don't mean rushing your artwork again. You can take it as slow as you want, but when you lay down a line, try to keep the energy within it. Okay, try to do it in one stroke rather than little tiny strokes. And by one stroke, I don't mean like drawing out the entire leg in one single stroke. I mean bits of it. So upper thigh, lower thigh, knee, calf, boom, right? But not little tiny strokes, not where you're like sketching it out with little ant sized contours that are all connected. And that's how you'll maintain a strength to your work, to your contours. They'll look reinforced, they'll look powerful. Like there's nothing that's going to stop them going down the trajectory that they're going down. Exactly. Yeah. What I get is sharp corners resulting in confident streaks. And remember that the edges in between those corners, they can have some curvaceousness to them. They can glide. They can be fluid, but make sure that they sort of end at a corner and then change trajectory. But don't make it a hardened rule that you're never able to break. There are going to be, of course, times, outlying situations where you are going to have curved corners, and that's totally fine too. Whatever works for the illustration, remember that as much as you're directing it, it's directing you at the same time. Okay, there we go. Mr. Beehole Sniffer, what's going on? He says, it comes down to passion, doesn't it? Anyone can learn to draw, but you have to have a passion for drawing in order to put the time in. Yeah. It's as simple as that. It's amazing what we will do for the things we're truly passionate about, what lengths we'll be prepared to go to. You often hear that, people just don't have enough time to draw because of their job or because when they get home from their job, they're too tired or, other responsibilities in life taking their attention away. Yet they'll find time to play a video game or watch a movie, or they'll find time to go on a holiday. And the thing is, if drawing is truly important to you, if you're going to look back when you're on the edge of death and regret never having pursued it, regret never have drawn your best piece of artwork that you know you could have drawn if you'd put the time in, then you've got to do what it takes. Because I think that pursuing something that worthy, a worthy ideal, a passion, people ask what the meaning of life is. I think that's the closest thing to it. Pushing ourselves to the epitome in a craft that takes effort, in something that matters to us, that's dear to our heart. And if there's something that is that important to you, then you'll make the time for it. You owe it to yourself and you owe it to your craft. You owe it to whatever gift, whatever talent you plan on cultivating. And you will cultivate it. with determination, and you'll make the time. You'll set aside the video games, you'll tell your friends that you can't go out on the weekend, that you can't catch up, and you'll make it happen. You'll quit school and you'll just draw. You quit your job and you'll just draw if it really matters to you. Where is it on the hierarchy of necessities? That's what you have to ask yourself. What are you putting before your art that doesn't really matter? You have to eat, okay? You have to eat at some point, right? You could go a few days just drawing without eating, but you have to eat at some point. So it's a pretty big necessity. You have to breathe. You have to drink water. You have to hydrate yourself while you're drawing. But is video games a necessity? No. Is watching movies a necessity? Not really. Is surfing Facebook, is jumping on social media a necessity? No, it's not. How much time do we waste on that stuff? Time that we could be using to draw. It's insane when you get one of those apps downloaded on your phone that actually monitors how much time we spend on social media. It'll scare the heck out of you. How much of your life has been drained away with that stuff that you'll never get back. Big hello to John. Thanks for joining us for this demonstration. Keep it simple, stupid. Oh, yeah. Kiss. That's something that I took a long time to learn, by the way, keeping it simple, but it seems to be the way to go in order to get the best outcome in most things. Hello, Sticky Art. Good to see you. True, simple, elegant. Yes, indeed. Unlucky Jack says, "This is so true. After high school and getting into work, I've been a huge slacker, from dropping manga projects to quitting halfway, although I am getting better. Look, it's difficult in this day and age to stay committed, especially to long term projects. It's really, really tough because there's a lot of different distractions out there that are extremely appealing that give you immediate gratification. They release your dopamine constantly. There's never a moment where your dopamine isn't being released these days. It could be a notification going off on your phone. It could be anything. The funny thing is that we once got gratification. We once got that hit of dopamine release simply by drinking water. Do you know that you get a dopamine release just from drinking water? Right? So when you found water, you'd be rewarded for it through your own biology to encourage you to keep on seeking out water. Same with food. Same with building something, building a hut, or 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 achieving something. It could have been anything, but the thing is that we get that false sense of achievement now, and from left, right, and center, from things that really have no impact, that have no substance whatsoever, that are intangible, that say nothing about what it is we are capable of achieving. And the cool thing about it is that if we're able to detach a little bit more from that dopamine releasing stuff, those drugs you could call them, because that's exactly what drugs do, is they release massive amounts of dopamine to get you hooked. That's why we can't keep off social media. That's why we can't stop playing video games. This is a fact, not conspiracy, I promise you. But the more we can avoid that stuff, the more we can click back into being gratified and feeling accomplished through things like our art, things that we're actually putting time and commitment into that truly matter, that mean something, that aren't just a waste of time and energy, that don't drain us unnecessarily, but give us something back for the time that we're investing into them. So it's not really your fault. I mean, there's just so many distractions out there these days that are turning us into people who are lazy, even in the face of the things that we tell ourselves we care the most about, the things that we should be working the hardest toward, that we're simply not. And so we've really got to work hard to redirect ourselves to ensure that we can complete those manga or comic book projects. There's things that do require extended periods of time where you're not going to be gratified. But you're going to have to delay that gratification And typically, the longer we have to work on something and the more extended that gratification delay becomes, the greater the outcome will be, the more brilliant that achievement is going to result as. Okay, we've got baby bat. Hey, how you doing? Says, yeah, I start getting anxious at about an hour. Yep. Yep, it can be tough. All right. Some person says, first step to being an artist, having a head injury. Yeah, totally. Deme King says he's a tortured artist. It's too late for him. Just, just and learn. Yeah. Baby Bat says self judgment is harsh. Don't do that to yourself. It's so easy to judge ourselves, to beat ourselves up for what we perceive as inadequacies. You know, a lot of the time, the things I view as shortcomings within myself, most people don't even notice. In fact, there's a moments in time where those inadequacies are the things that people admire about me somehow, some way. You know, I might do a live demonstration like the one I just walked you through, and I might be completely unsatisfied with it, not realizing how many artists out there benefited through me doing that. And this is really true with some of the tutorials I've released out there online, tutorials that I was going to take down just because I felt like they weren't my best thing. And in a sense, I feel like when you're too preoccupied with yourself on that level where you're self-criticizing to that extent, it's I mean, it's pretty self-involved, isn't it? It's a little bit selfish to deny the world of the gifts that you could be giving them, whether it's knowledge, whether it's just a beautiful piece of artwork that they might enjoy. You never know who's going to enjoy the art that you create. Remember that you're not creating art for yourself, you're creating it for other people. It's your gift to them. As much as you enjoy it, if you're just creating art in a cave that no one ventured into, how long would you be satisfied doing it? No, this is why we want that validation from an audience, because we want to know that the gift we're giving them is valued, that they're enjoying it, that they're having a good experience when they see it. And so to be too preoccupied with yourself, so preoccupied that you deny the world of your art, of your creations, you second guess yourself so much that you either don't attempt or throw away the things that you did create because you feel as though it's not your best yet. Well, it is in a sense self centered. It truly is by definition. So don't be so preoccupied with yourself. Focus on doing your best and put it out there. Or at least just be satisfied that you've got another one in the tank, another notch on your belt. That's another illustration in the can that's going to lead you to a better one down the line. And so appreciate it, cherish it. Know that it's going to get you to where you want to be, and without it, you never would. Unlucky Jack says, so true. I did so many studies and no drawings for so long when I was in school that I ultimately forgot what I learned. Yeah, it's nuts. It's nuts. A lot of people get trapped in that place and they gain all this knowledge, all these skills, but they never really end up doing what they intended to do with them in the first place. And a lot of the time, when it comes to the people who sign up for my mentoring sessions, I'll tell you one thing: even if they think they need to improve more in the fundamentals, improve more in anatomy, improve more in proportions, improve more in perspective and form and whatnot, a lot of the time, that's not it at all. They're fine. They're doing great with that stuff. What they don't have is a portfolio of work that they've created with that knowledge. And that's the problem. They're wondering where to go next. And it's just like, well, buddy, the rubber needs to meet the road at some point. You need to do with something with all this stuff that you've learned, right? You can't just keep drawing figure drawings for your entire career. And there's going to be a learning curve with applying those fundamentals within the context that you intended to use them in. Because drawing characters in proportions for a character design is different to drawing characters in proportion for a comic book page. There's going to be a variety of different ways in which you're going to have to think about proportions in order to pull either of those different forms of illustration off. That's something that you can't learn without actually going through the process of creating an illustration of some kind with those skills. I know it's intimidating and it's scary. Do you know why it's so intimidating and it's scary? It's because if you fail at drawing an illustration, if you fail at drawing that comic book page or that comic book cover or that storyboard, whatever it is you're setting out to create, what does that say about all the time you put in to studying up on proportions and anatomy and perspective and the fundamentals? We don't want to, we want to know that we're able to create perfect illustrations by the time we get to the point of actually creating them, but that's just unrealistic. It's never going to happen. I hate to break it to you. You're going to have to learn about the fundamentals, how to create a solid foundation for your illustration, and then you're going to need to learn how to implement it. And you need both. You can't have one without the other. That's a lot of people don't realize that because it's not taught, because you won't find that little gem of knowledge within a course, within a class, because they always give you the basics, but very rarely do they give you the opportunity to indulge in the experience of actually creating something with it. The rubber to the road portion of it. How do you apply this stuff now? They leave that part out. That's why I love workshops. Okay, one of my most favorite websites that I subscribe to is the Gnome One Workshop because they have professional artists on there that are creating a piece of work and they're walking you through what's going through their head, the considerations that they're making that go far and beyond whatever fundamentals they learned about in order to be able to pull it off. And that's the missing component that many of us don't have direct access to, unfortunately, because it's not emphasized enough. So, like if you type in how to learn to draw into Google or into YouTube, you're going to get the same stuff come up, the same basic stuff. Some person says you get better, you grow a beanie on your head and long fingers. Yes, that's right. Baby Bat Adam 15 says you can spend a lot of time drowning yourself in studies, but you have to find the motion and the shapes. Yes, I've realized, especially in my later years as an artist, very recently, in fact, maybe the last few years, that shape is everything. And good old Shelby Robertson brought that to my attention. He said, as long as you're able to capture a solid shape, you can put anything within it, and the drawing will read fairly well, even if what you put inside that shape doesn't quite work or measure up. It's ideal that it does, but shape has a significant level of importance when it comes to your art. Make no mistake. Silky C says, "True, true. I need to hear this. It's good. That's good." Hockey says, "Clayton's ego to the door to see who's there." Damie King says, "Has he done a video on perspective yet?" Yeah, I need to do one of those. Okay, so this is a good question. Silky C says, "How long should each rough sketch take? I find myself I find myself spending too much time on the beginning." Okay, so how long should a rough sketch take? Don't beat yourself up about spending a decent amount of time on the initial rough sketch because it's arguably the most important stage of the entire drawing because everything else is going to hinge on it. You'll be building the character's design on top of that initial sketch. You'll be refining the line work based on that initial sketch. You'll be inking it based on that initial sketch. You'll be coloring it. So it has to be right. Even if it takes the longest amount of time out of every other aspect of that illustration, give it the time it needs. Develop it, make the tweaks that you need to make, perfect it, not to an obsessive degree, not to a needless level, but certainly try to get it as accurate as you possibly can to the extent where there's enough information there for you to confidently go over the top and refine the idea without having to worry about whether it's in the correct proportions, without having to worry about whether or not you're dealing with the whether or not you've got the general shapes worked out or the anatomy. That initial sketch should have all the information you need to move forward. So once that's there, then you know it's ready to move on. But yes, spend as long as you need. Short answer, spend as long as you need on the initial stages of your drawing. They're definitely very important. Spend a whole day on them if you need to. I've done that before. I'll dedicate a whole day to the sketch, and then a few days to the rest if I need. Unlucky Jack says, "Dang, I'm the opposite. I was way more comfortable with traditional after 2 years of digital." That's funny. Look, I love working traditional still sometimes. It can be truly amazing. And it definitely has a different feel to it, a different energy. And I still like working traditionally. I can still do it. It's just that I guess out of a attraction to convenience, I continue working with digital, especially in regards to inking, because I can't ink traditionally. I haven't learned how to do that proficiently yet. So that would require some additional study. And man, at this point, I've studied enough. I just want to draw. You know what I'm saying? I just want to draw. Okay. Gmail says, "That is my exact issue. I need to assemble a portfolio." Yep, do it. Get it together. Bite the bullet. AFK Gamer. All right, thanks for everything. No problem. Hockey says, "I need to pick my daughter up from work. Keep it at it, everyone. You will get better. I, I know because I am also you. All the best." Yep, we're all in this together, guys. We're all constantly trying to improve. AFK Gamer says, "I used reference to make a Miles Morales drawing. I'm quite proud of it, although it's nowhere as good as I wanted it to be." It's good. Use that. Use that to keep you. Use that to propel you forward into further, greater levels of improvement. It's good to have a reason to get better. Don't ever think you're at the top of the mountain because that's when you'll start sliding back down it. Geek Jesus says, "My best ideas come during a shower or when I'm trying to sleep." It's crazy. Same here. I have my best ideas when I'm on the cusp of sleep, actually. Usually, when I'm having a shower, I'm just thinking about what I'm going to do after the shower. I hate having a shower, to be honest with you. I do shower regularly, but I hate having to do it because it's just a distraction. It's distracting me from what I want to be doing. But yeah, when I'm on the cusp of sleep, that's when I have some great ideas. And Actually, I have a little notepad document on my phone where the really good ideas, I jot them down into the notepad document and save it. Evual Lavia says, I like working without undo and zoom and working with my mistakes. Yeah, that can be fun. You have those happy accidents. Give them an opportunity to come through and help direct things. Okay, cool. JB says, I listen to you at night while I sleep. You're so meditative. My girlfriend left me, but I sleep better and draw better and save money. Triple whammy win. Well, I'm honored that I'm just honored by that. Thank you so much. Um, I'm glad that you find me relaxing to listen to. I can't say the same for everybody, but I'm glad that you do. Yeah, I like to give extra bang for your buck, even on a free stream where I'm demonstrating the process. Says, I'm sorry I asked too much. I didn't expect every question to be covered. No, you're welcome. Don't worry about it. It's great. I'm glad. Keep asking questions, everybody. Well, I'm actually about to head off here, but I appreciate the questions and the input and the engagement on the stream. Evils Lavia says, yeah, wise. But the board flips when you get better and see 80% of the artists not being as good as you. Don't ever be comfortable. Yeah. Yeah, I really don't like that. I don't like it when the artists who I was aspiring to get to the level of, I don't like seeing their artwork as not being as great as it once was to me. That can be a scary thing because now you're like, whoa, okay, what do I use to drive me forward now? What am I trying to aspire to get to? Unfortunately, my friends, that is all that we have time for today. Now, I would highly encourage you. I'm going to leave this stream up probably for the next 12 to 24 hours. If you did enjoy it, be sure to share it with your art friends, family, whoever you feel will get value out of it, and do it soon so that they can check it out before it gets taken down and either upload it again as a proper tutorial into the channel library or packaged into a premium product. I'm not too sure what I'm going to do with these lessons yet. There is going to be more though. So ensure that if you'd like to see more of them, you hit subscribe, you ring the bell for notifications. It's especially important because when these do go live, if they're up there for only a temporary amount of time, I don't want you to miss out on them. And I know that you don't want to miss out on them. So ring the bell for notifications so that you can be notified prior to when the stream ends up happening. I'll have more streams coming up, more tutorials, different topics that I plan on covering. So if you'd like to see any specific topics covered, be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments below. I'll be sure to check them out. I'll copy and paste them into a tutorials list that I will go through and that I'll show you demonstrations of, just like the one that you saw today, explaining in depth and detail as to exactly what my process is for tackling each of these different topics. Until next time, everyone, keep on creating, keep on drawing, stay inspired, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye for now.